know Tectone. He's an individual I'm familiar with, so you could say I have a bias towards Tectone. But that being said, I'm going to try to do this as neutrally as possible and present both sides of the argument. Because remember, there are always two sides of the argument, and particularly in this post-debt Me Too era, we have to consider all of the factors before we just go out and cancel someone for these allegations. And then we've got the plaintiff Pikachu, who's a streamer here, and we're going to be getting into their relationship. The important thing to notice between the defendant, Tectone, and Pikachu is they dated, right? So these are exes. They had a relationship that is now over, and then you have filings and accusations coming from this, mainly from a drop by Mizkif, who is clearly trying to put information out there that leads people away from his own case at this point. That seems to be his general legal strategy. So let's get into this. This is Pikachu versus Tectone over abuse allegations, both emotional and sexual in nature. There were filings both in the civil context and the criminal context. Now, the civil context that was taken all the way to a conclusion, but the criminal context, mind you, was a police report which was dropped. So that is very, very critical here that there are no criminal conclusions regarding Tectone, and that's something that needs to be very, very much reinforced throughout all of this. Now, Tectone did deny the allegations of Pikachu, including her of defamation and filing counter evidence, but Tectone ultimately lost his civil suit and was ruled liable for SA, even despite the fact that the criminal case was dropped by police. And this had consequences for Tectone because Mythic, the talent agency, which is also my talent agency, dropped them over this. Now, to be very clear about this, once again, with Mythic, I made it very clear with them that I would be covering issues regardless of how things look. And with Mythic, they have a right, and I can say this based on my own contract, to drop you based on brand appearance, etc. And many advertisers are gun shy, so even if the allegations are just allegations, they can drop you. Think about Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp was dropped by Disney, dropped by other advertisers, simply because of allegations that were not yet proven in court. So this is something that Mythic dropping him doesn't make him per se guilty of anything at this point. Another person, by the way, that's involved in this, and we're going to get into this, is Freem, who is a former marriage partner of Tectone. So while she's not necessarily a plaintiff, Freem's information is very much relevant to this analysis. So let's get into the kind of some background here before we get into a word. But actually, before we do that, let's get into a word from today's video sponsor. And now a word from today's sponsor, Delete Me. Okay, guys, let's be real. New Year's resolutions really do not last long, usually not outside January. Gym memberships, diets, budgets, all those things that are all nebulous, that don't have any set goals or any concrete things, those usually get blown before Valentine's Day. But the sponsor of this video is a quick New Year's resolution that you can complete in just 5 minutes. The resolutions that I tend to keep are ones that are fast, they're easy to finish in one sitting, and they're net positive for my life. They do something good that I can get done very, very, very quickly. And that's exactly what's offered with Delete Me, which is my first sponsor ever on this channel. It removes your personal details like contact information and your home address from hundreds of data broker sites that can be set up quickly in less time than a pizza delivery. And all of this, all the protection that you get from Delete Me runs completely in the background and does the work for you, protecting your privacy all year long. This is key for reducing your digital footprint, which can protect you from all of the scams out there on the internet. And there are tons of scams on the internet. As a naturally lazy person, and I am so lazy, this is something that even I, Mr. Captain Lazy, could get done really quickly, and it's the laziest smart thing you can do all year. Right now, get 20% discount with the link in the description and the pinned comments below. Now, we live in a world that's post-Depp versus Amber Heard, and this is actually, despite what people say, it wasn't Disney, it wasn't Doki, it wasn't anything else that really blew me up. It was Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp and covering this case. And in this case, LawTube really blew up because we started covering this neutrally, whereas the whole world in that Me Too era was pro-Amber Heard and pro saying all women believe what she says. And it turns out that Johnny Depp was indeed wrong here, and he was vindicated in court. And so when I analyze this Tectone case, I look at this as we are in a post-Depp world. We need to live in a world where we don't believe my dog stepped on a bee, and we don't believe any tall tale that came out of what Amber Heard's mouth or anybody else says, because we've seen cases out there in the U.S. that I've covered on this channel, like Trevor Bauer, like the Khan case at Princeton, where we have people that are absolutely destroyed. Their careers are just absolutely wrecked based on pure allegation. So let's get into what happened. So all the evidence I'm treating at a higher degree if it's been filed with the court, not just online. But a lot of this stuff that's been filed, that's online, was indeed filed with the court. And every individual case has to be evaluated for its impact. So what does a civil case mean? Well, what that means is there's a standard of proof that's lower to the evidence, 51%, you could say, instead of reason beyond reasonable doubt, which is 99.9% of the time, and such, or up in the upper percentages of happened. But Tectone hasn't been convicted of anything criminal. So for all those out there, and I'm looking at you, all the princes of the world and everybody else who's throwing names out there, calling him the R word, and I can't say that because of YouTube, is not actually okay. He hasn't been convicted. That is still defamatory to label him as a criminal when he is indeed not been convicted of criminal. So one thing, looking at the background here, once again, part one, just looking at the background, Travis County in Texas has a huge pro-female bias in terms of outcomes. Women who file tend to get very, very, very favorable outcomes in Texas and Travis County. And there's a potential activist judge who had a DV bias, who had a history of that did not recuse themselves in this case. Super relevant. Also, a jury pool that's biased towards the plaintiff with a skewed heavy female bias. Everybody in the courtroom being female, that can tend to bias things when it comes to these outcomes. The other thing which is different from the Miskiff situation is we haven't seen abusive communications. In fact, all the communications I reviewed show Tectone as a reasonable, kind guy. He approached Pikachu as a friend, not even as a person trying to slide into the DMs, which, number one, is not a crime, but number two, that wasn't how he approached it. He approached this very innocently after he was betrayed in a relationship which Freem cheated on him with somebody who was working at the same company, so a work partner, right? So after he was cheated on, he ends up engaging in this relationship, which once again, not smart to rebound, not smart to work with somebody, or sorry, engage with somebody who's perhaps a streamer right afterwards. Dating streamers, always not good, right? Two streamers dating, always not good. But we haven't seen those abusive communications. In fact, when I review the communications, they look much more supportive. And by the way, I'm very, very, very cognizant as someone who struggles with depression myself. This is something I'm very, very sympathetic to for both parts, right? Because Tectone has his own mental health stuff, and Pikachu has her own mental health stuff. But when I read this communications between the two, it doesn't seem like this is abusive. So Pikachu says right here, I have something called PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, that I'm being treated for. So I'm in a lot of physical pain and my emotions are really bad. Like just feeling so depressed I don't even want to. So on stream today it was really, really rough. I'm trying to be tough through it all, but it's not easy when it feels like the end of the world. So please be patient with me. The doctor said it could be 6 months for treatment to fully work. But in the meantime, it's awful managing the mood swings and pain. And I understand this. I understand this completely. And so I'm sympathetic to this. And I understand that there may be some other things going in there with BPD or bipolar disorder, something I'm very familiar with. And I get that. I completely get that. She says, thank you to everyone for being so kind to me while I deal with this. I'm sorry for crying on stream while I did that today. Sometimes it's harder holding it in, but I'm hoping by summer it's going to go a lot better to hang in there. It's tough. I get it. It's tough. And what does Tectone say? He says, I will never understand how much this must hurt you, but proud you're fighting through it. And this is not the language I would see of an abusive partner, someone who's hurting, or someone who's out there to get somebody, but someone who really genuinely wants to help and genuinely care. So Pikachu's filings regarding Freem are contradictory. She had filings regarding Freem to get her information taken down. So Freem called her a house wrecker, called her all sorts of things, filmed her without her consent, engaging in sexual activities with Tectone. Once again, several civil and potentially criminal violations regarding Pikachu and Tectone that were committed by Freem, and Pikachu filed to stop those, which is to me contradictory. And it seems like this may be a case of what you call buyer's remorse in dating, where you go back and you say, okay, well, now that I'm out of this, this is a situation where it was buyer's remorse. I regret things I did, or I regret stuff I did, even though it was consensual at the time. And unfortunately, as I got to report to you guys, the U.S. legal system weaponizes this. It allows people to go back, regret things, and then go get protective orders, go make claims in the future, when all of this should be dealt with privately. So my judgment at this moment, having reviewed the documents that are out there, is to withhold judgment for the moment pending release of further documentation evidence. We may have stuff that eventually gets unsealed, or more communications that come out, more than just what Miskiff is trying to put out to paint some sort of narrative. In a post-death world, we all need to account for all the evidence taken as a whole before concluding somebody is ripe for cancellation, right? Miskiff releasing these documents clearly does just to take pressure off his case, which contains evidence of abusive communications. Now, I'm not saying Miskiff is guilty yet. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt too. He's going to have his day in court. But if all he's got is throwing a plushie, that's not going to do enough to get away from all the accusations. And first and foremost, I also think that intimate partner relations are very personal and private. Things can get heated between partners. And you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be dragging this out to the court of public opinion and trying to sue people to make these things right. Maybe we should handle these things privately as adults between two people. Right now, judgment is withheld, but we'll get back. What do you guys think in the comments below? What do you think about Techno, the Eggman, and what's going on with him? I'll catch you on the next one. Breaking the Ku Klux Klan Act on Martin Luther King Day. That's what we're covering today on Legal Mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney. This is a fast facts video, the quick and dirty version of the latest in legal news. So let's get right into the PowerPoint here, the PP. We got Don Lemon violating the KKK Act. In case you don't know who Don Lemon is, the defendant in this case, as we present it, he is a former newscaster. He worked at CNN and NBC, but he was fired by CNN in 2023. He led a group of anti-ICE protesters into an active church worship service on Martin Luther King Day.
This is an operation that is secret.
This is Operation Pull Up, more of a clandestine operation. We show up somewhere. They don't expect us to come there, and then we disrupt business as usual.
Disrupting the worship service, traumatizing elderly, children, and all the parishioners there in the name of this anti-ICE protest. So let's look into the plaintiff. The plaintiff is Carmi Dillon. That is the DOJ. That is, of course, the U.S. federal government that has said that they are looking to take action on this, specifically to prevent further copycat instances and places of worship all around the United States being disrupted by protesters freely. So what is the background here? Well, let's get to our opening statements. The Ku Klux Klan Act is AKA the Civil Rights Act of 1871. That's just another name for the Civil Rights Act of 1871. And the big thing that applies here is the prohibition on conspiracy, specifically conspiracies that deprive anyone, meaning individuals, of constitutional rights such as voting, assembly, or worship. Worship being the freedom to go to your place of worship, whether that is a church, a synagogue, a mosque, whatever, and be able to worship freely without having that right impinged upon by others. Now, this is a very serious act, and it can impose monetary and criminal penalties up to 10 years in prison. So there is some significant time potentially faced by Don Lemon and the others that may be convicted under this act. Now, the irony here, of course, is it happened on Martin Luther King Day, and this very act has been used multiple times in the past to stop people such as white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan, from violating those rights during Reconstruction. It's going to happen very, very, very often. However, in this case, it's going to be applied a little bit differently according to the arguments of the state. The state is alleging that Don Lemon participated in a criminal conspiracy because he knew the plan to enter the church and disrupt the worship service. It's very key here that you know it's a conspiracy beforehand. So this is all going to turn on, and the argument of the state relies upon knowledge that they were going to disrupt that service and enter into the church. This violates the Christian parishioners' right to worship, to have a freedom of worship that is unimpinged by anybody else, that nobody else is going to come in and violate that or stop them from worshiping freely. And this is something that the Ku Klux Klan used in very similar fashion during Reconstruction. Now, the argument of the defense will be that, oh, well, they were more violent, and that's something that's up to the judge to consider. But really, it's not part of the key element here, which is knowledge. If you knew this was going to happen, then you might be part of that conspiracy. Also, interestingly, under the FACE Act, blocking access to places of worship is also illegal. This is actually a part of case law that came out of blocking access to abortion clinics, but it equally applies to places of worship, etc. So they might also be liable under this act as well, not just the KKK Act, the FACE Act. Now, in Don Lemon's defense, so Don Lemon will argue that, hey, I was just conducting journalism, and this is going to have a chilling effect, meaning it's going to discourage journalists in the United States from conducting journalism. He'd also argue that the KKK Act really hasn't been applied to journalism before, not in the same way, and certainly not to a individual such as Don Lemon on Martin Luther King Day. However, that would not stop it necessarily from being applied. It would just be the first application to a journalist in this instance. Lemon said he wasn't protesting, and he said he was just conducting journalism alone. And when they asked him to leave, he said that that's the moment in which he left. So that's his argument. Hey, when they asked me to leave, I left. Because remember, guys, this is private property. Searches are private property. They're not the public commons. They're not a place where everybody can assemble and do whatever they want. They are private property. They can trespass you. And when they tell you to leave a church, mosque, synagogue, whatever, you have to leave, as that is private property of that particular area. Lemon can argue the protest was nonviolent, and I think that's more of a mitigating factor in terms of bringing down the penalty or the civil amount he'd have to pay in actual dollars. I think that's more mitigating, but it doesn't completely take away the conspiracy element. Now, in some of the kind of the wrapping up, looking at some of the other case law on this, whether he would be protected or not protected. The thing is, guys, journalism and guys and gals, journalism is not a complete shield. It's not complete immunity. For example, there have been cases such as blocking access to abortion clinics where journalists were indeed held as part of that and they were held liable. So there's cases in which journalists and journalism is not going to allow you to fully escape criminal punishment. Also, if there are any communications, if there's anything between the protest organizers, the people that were in charge of that protest, the anti-ICE protest, that would hurt less. Also, think about the backpackers. Targeting a predominantly white church and labeling parishioners as quote-unquote white supremacists supports a hate crime angle. It does not matter that they are white. Whether they're white, black, brown, whatever, it does not matter. It is based on your race, right? That is something that is supporting a hate crime angle. Race, nationality, origin, that would all play in here. So this absolutely would reinforce the angle of the KKK Act. Now, there are possibilities of additional charges coming, such as child endangerment or elder abuse, child abuse as well. So that might be something that comes down the line when we see this going down the line. Now, those could give up to 10 years in prison, whether it's child endangerment or elder abuse. Now, for the judgment, this is a great test case of the application of the KKK Act, and a thorough investigation should indeed be held. I do believe that they should be investigated very, very thoroughly, and that they should look into this very, 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 very closely. We need to get all the emails, texts, and communications between Don Lemon and the protest organizers and others involved in that to show how much did Don Lemon actually know. If Don Lemon knew that they were going to disrupt this service, then he is certainly hooked in on the conspiracy. And if this act is inapplicable, other charges should be investigated, whether that is child endangerment or elder abuse, whatever. Both of those younger people, we have pictures of children crying, and elderly people were impacted by this. And those are vulnerable groups. Violation of freedom of worship would be equally intolerable if it was conducted against non-white parishioners. So in my book, if this happened to a situation with a mosque or a synagogue, and this was a bunch of white people coming in or whatever, if this was a bunch of Latinos coming in, it doesn't matter. It would not change the analysis here. And I think this is something we need to stop very, very harshly before there are these other copycats all across the United States. But I want to know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next. Asmongold has a very clear defamation case that he should pursue if he decides that's worth it for himself. Of course, the legal mindset would teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney living over here in Asia, and this is a fast fact video, the quick and dirty version of the latest in legal news. So let's jump right into it with our PowerPoint here. In case you guys aren't familiar with Asmongold, he's a little bit of a thing, a little bit of a big streamer, and he's got enough clout, enough power, enough resources to actually go through with these lawsuits. And this puts him in a much better and bigger position than he would be elsewise if he was somebody else other than Asmongold. But because he is Asmongold, he has this golden opportunity to go through with a defamation lawsuit. So let's get into it. What are the parties? Well, the potential plaintiffs are both Asmongold and the person that was actually defamed as well, Kaze, the streamer over here. You see her here is Asmongold's Kaze. They are collaborators. They are, as far as my research went into this topic, just friends. They never appeared to be dating, etc. But even if they were, that wouldn't be a problem, as we will show here as the facts go on. So the defendants, well, they're really accounts, rather anonymous accounts, on two different profiles on X, formerly Twitter, and of course on Reddit. We see some kind of usual suspects here. If you guys have been following the line, you know about the lawsuits, these James and John Does of Reddit that are being sued in the Klein lawsuit. This is very, very similar, where we have anonymous accounts that would be identified. Now, in a recent video, Asmongold did say he's already got the name.
This is actually crazy to say about somebody, right? Crazy to say. I'm thinking, like, you know, I'm already in a lawsuit, right? I'm already in a lawsuit. I'm already regularly talking to lawyers. Maybe I should sue this guy. Will we just make stuff up now? That's a serious accusation to tweet with no receipts. I'll talk to my lawyers next time I have a meeting with them. Then I'll see kind of what their input is, right? It's so cringe to see something.
It's not as relevant because maybe there's some other information that they get through subpoena from X or from Reddit. But if you've already got the names, that's more than half of the battle. The opening statement. So essentially, Asmongold states baseless EDF, if you want to be friendly, allegations in early January 2026, stemming from a viral X post which falsely claimed he was dating Sheila Kaze when she was underage. She was not underage. That was a falsity of that post. Her age was misrepresented as 17, even though she was over 20, right now. No hack message. The post had over 130K likes and was engaged with by millions of people before deletion. I'm going to show you that post in a second. Asmongold has called the allegations completely false. So the alleged, misrepresentation of age, etc., is completely false, and threatened defamation against anyone spreading that misinformation. So not just the OP, but other accounts. And there were other accounts, and there are other accounts that still have that information up nowadays. Defense of the poster, well, it really is hard to defend this guy or girl, whoever it is. But they say, hey, we deleted the tweet, but not before it was viewed by millions, not before the harm was done, and not before others reposted it on Reddit. So that is a very, very weak defense if you're looking at it from the side of which side the burden is going to fall more on, and that's on the defense at this point. Because unless you've got some secret proof, this looks like a very clear-cut, bulletproof defamation. In case you don't know, here's the original post. Of course, this is false. This is false information. So this account, which once again, I'm not going to say that Sigmund gives that person. We're just saying he was 33, she was 17. Asmongold is and this word, the word that means criminal with someone who is underage, right? I'm censoring that word. We all know what that is, right? And you see a picture here. Now, to me, this is absolutely ridiculous. It reminds me of kind of the height of consent argument, where, okay, you have to be so high to consent. And as a tall guy, it's always like, what, am I not allowed to date short girls, right? If you are not allowed to go down, and it always is the kind of meme of 5'7" guys versus 5'7" girls. It's much different if it's a girl, right? The girl's super tall, and a 5'7" guy is a shrimp, right? You're not allowed to date short guys. You're not allowed to do it. But it's kind of a ridiculous argument, and frankly, if you look at this girl case here, and you see a child, you are the problem. The problem is not the person who is dating this person or friends with this person or whatever. You are definitely the problem. And looking at the particular evidence here in Uncle Mindset's evidence law, I would say that a lot of evidence is going to believe this is not an underage person, just based on basic appearance. But hey, that's me living up here in Asia. I want to know what you guys think in the comments below. Now, let's go to the argument. The original poster now is the best target legally, and that's the person that the majority of the blame is following. Other accounts are posted the same information, and they can also be active parties. But here's the thing, many of these people are probably going to be guilty. So the purpose of this lawsuit, the key of this lawsuit is set a precedent. Very similar to the client case, setting a precedent regarding the retrieving information on anonymous accounts on Reddit. In this case, you'd be setting a precedent for the use of this word, right? And the ubiquitous use of this word on platforms with no trolling, no fact-checking, nothing else. People have been using this word, and it's really harmful because it is defamatory and criminal. So Asmongold would be able to subpoena people on X and Reddit, similar to the client case, for both user data and preservation of evidence. And it's best done ASAP. There's a short statute of limitations on this, only 1 to 3 years. So he's got to get moving on this within the next year. Or two. The law does prevent direct suit of X or Reddit, which is under Section 230. Now, I obviously, on this channel, if you've been watching it for a while, have a problem with that. I do think some of these 230 protections should be lightened up in cases like these where they failed to protect against a very common thing. This is something that is known, these 230 lawsuits. The